In the year 180 of our era, a philosopher-emperor lay dying in a campaign tent on the banks of the Danube, while Rome's legions held the line against the Germanic hordes that threatened to devour the heart of the empire. By his side, a general born in the provinces, a man of humble origins who had climbed every rung of Roman power with blood, sweat, and loyalty, waited in silence. Marcus Aurelius looked at him with weary eyes. He had offered him the throne. The general refused. But what came next was not peace. It was not order. It was not the dream of a philosopher fulfilled. It was the rise of a monster. A son who turned the Colosseum into his playground, an emperor who believed himself Hercules and bathed the arena in innocent blood. And in the shadows of that circus of horror, a fighter with a forgotten name waited for his moment. Bare hands against a tyrant's throat, steam from hot water, a body that stopped breathing. And Rome, for an instant, was free again. When the sun of the first day of January of the year 193 rose over the 7 hills, the throne was empty. An empire trembled. And the echoes of that night would resonate for centuries, until an English film director saw a painting of a fallen gladiator and decided the world needed to hear this story again. But what Hollywood told was one version. Beautiful, epic, unforgettable, and largely invented, because the truth is darker, more complex, and more fascinating than any screenplay ever written. This is the story of the real men behind Maximus, the generals, the fighters, the conspirators, and the tyrants who inspired the most famous gladiator in cinema. This is the story that Rome doesn't want you to know. To understand the real Maximus, you must understand the world he was born into. Rome, in the 2nd century, was the most powerful empire humanity had ever known. More than 60 million souls lived under the imperial eagle, but even empires have cracks. From the east, soldiers returning from the war against the Parthians brought with them the Antonine Plague, a devastating pestilence that killed between 5 and 10 million people. The legions lost men they could not replace, and while Rome bled from within, from outside the Germanic tribes smelled weakness. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Sarmatians, pushed by the migration of the Goths, pressed against the Danube frontier. Under the command of King Balamar, a Germanic coalition crossed the river en masse, crushed 20,000 Romans near Carnuntum, and advanced onto Italian soil. Aquileia was besieged. Rome was on the brink of the abyss. It was in this crucible of fire where the men emerged who, 18 centuries later, would lend their lives to a fictional character named Maximus Decimus Meridius. It was not a single man. There were several, and each of them was, in his own way, more extraordinary than the hero on the screen. The first, and perhaps the most direct inspiration, was Marcus Nonius Macrinus. Born around the year 111 in Brescia, in northern Italy, Macrinus belonged to a provincial, senatorial family. He was a man from the periphery who looked toward Rome with the quiet ambition of someone who knows he must earn every step. And he earned them. He was a senator by the age of 25, suffect consul in the year 154, legate of Pannonia Inferior, governor of Asia. But what distinguished Macrinus was not his titles, it was his relationship with the emperor. Marcus Aurelius chose him as one of his closest advisors. The inscriptions on his tomb describe him as chosen among the most intimate friends of the emperor. He marched with Aurelius to the wars against the Marcomanni. He fought in the Danube campaigns. This is where Macrinus's story intersects with fiction most clearly. A provincial general, loyal to the core, beloved by a philosopher-emperor, forged in the wars against the Germanic tribes on the Danube frontier. It is impossible not to see in this description the silhouette of Russell Crowe riding through the flames of a Germanic forest. But unlike Maximus, Macrinus did not fall into disgrace. He was not betrayed. He was not sold into slavery. He lived a long, prosperous and honored life. He died wealthy, respected, surrounded by his family. His son dedicated a magnificent mausoleum to him on the banks of the Tiber, near the Via Flaminia. A temple-shaped monument built entirely of white marble, so splendid that even the roof was made of carved stone. And for nearly 2 millennia, that mausoleum remained buried under 14 meters of alluvial mud, until in October of 2008, a team of archaeologists north of Rome found the remains of what they described as the most important ancient Roman monument in 20 or 30 years. The inscriptions left no doubt it was the tomb of Marcus Nonius Macrinus, the tomb of the real gladiator. The irony was bitter. In December of 2012, the Italian Ministry of Culture announced it had no funds to protect the remains. The tomb was buried again. A general who refused to be forgotten was returned to silence by bureaucracy. But Macrinus was only one piece of the puzzle. The second man who lent his soul to the character of Maximus was, in many ways, even more fascinating. Tiberius Claudius Pompeianus was born around the year 125 in Antioch, Syria. A new man, the first of his family to achieve senatorial rank. His father was merely a member of the equestrian order. In a society obsessed with lineage, Pompeianus was an upstart, and yet he acted. He served with distinction in the war against the Parthians. He was Suffet consul in the year 162. Marcus Aurelius appointed him military governor of Pannonia Inferior, where he repelled the Lombard invasion with efficiency and decisiveness. Then fate intervened. Lucius Verus died in January of the year 169, probably a victim of the plague, while returning from winter quarters in Aquileia. Marcus Aurelius, with the calculated swiftness of a politician who thinks like a general, arranged for his daughter Lucilla, Verus's widow, to marry Pompeianus. Overnight, the Syrian soldier became a member of the Nerva Antonine dynasty, son-in-law of the most respected emperor in Rome. And here comes the detail that connects Pompeianus to Maximus in an almost supernatural way. Marcus Aurelius offered him the title of Caesar. He offered him to be his heir. He offered him the throne of the world. And Pompeianus refused, not once, not twice. 3 times throughout his life he was offered supreme power, and 3 times he said no. A general who only wants to go home, a soldier who prefers a simple life to the weight of the imperial purple, a man who could rule the world but chooses not to. It is hard not to hear the words of Russell Crowe whispering among the golden wheat fields of Hispania. But real life is crueler than any film. Because when Marcus Aurelius died at the camp of Vindobona on the 17th of March of the year 180, a victim of the plague that had devastated his empire, it was not Pompeianus who inherited the throne. It was Commodus, the emperor's 18-year-old son, the young man who had accompanied his father in the Danube wars but had inherited neither his wisdom, nor his discipline, nor his sense of duty. Pompeianus tried to convince the young emperor to remain on the Danube frontier to complete the conquest of the Marcomanni. It was useless. Commodus had no interest in war. He had no interest in governing. What interested him was in Rome. The games, the Colosseum, the roar of the crowd. And so began one of the most grotesque and bloody reigns in the history of the Roman Empire, Lucius Aurelius. Commodus ascended to the throne as sole emperor in the year 180. He was 18 years old and had all the power in the world at his feet. His father had been a Stoic philosopher who wrote meditations on virtue while leading military campaigns against the barbarians. His son was something else. His son was a monster who had not yet revealed his claws. At first, the signs were subtle. Commodus delegated affairs of state to favorites and freedmen, first to Seotrus, his chamberlain, then to Perennis, the praetorian prefect, later to Cleander, a former slave who accumulated power and wealth while the emperor surrendered to his pleasures. Rome was governed by whim, by intrigue, by the changing will of a young man who preferred the arena to the Senate. In the year 182, barely 2 years after assuming power, the first conspiracy arose against him, and it was led by the least expected person, his own sister Lucilla. The same Lucilla who had been empress consort, the same one who had married Pompeianus on her father's orders. Humiliated because Commodus had granted the title of Augusta to his new wife Brutia Crispina, stripping her of the privileges she had enjoyed her entire life. Lucilla conspired with senators to eliminate her brother. The plan was simple. Pompeianus's nephew, a young man named Claudius Pompeianus Quintianus, would approach Commodus in an amphitheater and stab him. But the young man made a fatal error. Instead of acting in silence, he raised the dagger and shouted, "This is the dagger the Senate sends you." He was subdued before he could land a single blow. The reprisal was savage. Commodus executed the conspirators. Lucilla was exiled to the island of Capri, and shortly after executed. Senators fell like leaves in autumn. Fear settled over Rome like a permanent fog. And Pompeianus, who had not participated in the conspiracy, withdrew from public life. He claimed old age. He claimed eye problems. He went to his properties in the Italian countryside and disappeared from the political stage, watching from a distance as his brother-in-law transformed Rome into a nightmare circus. Because what came after the year 182 defies imagination. Commodus became convinced he was the reincarnation of Hercules. He ordered statues erected throughout the empire showing him dressed in the lion skin and wielding the demigod's club. He renamed himself with increasingly grandiose names: Lucius Aelius, Aurelius Commodus, Augustus, Herculeus, Romanus, Exsuperatorius, Amazonius, Invictus Felix Pius. He renamed the months of the calendar with his own titles. August became Commodus. September became Hercules. October became Invictus. He renamed all of Rome as Colonia Commodiana. The Senate became the Commodian Fortunate Senate. The legions received the suffix Commodiana. But none of this satisfied his hunger for spectacle. What truly consumed Commodus was the Colosseum. And not as a spectator, as a gladiator. He was left-handed and was tremendously proud of it. According to Cassius Dio, the historian who documented his reign with barely contained horror, Commodus could shoot arrows with such precision that he decapitated ostriches at full gallop and killed panthers the instant they attacked their victims in the arena. He had special arrowheads constructed designed to separate heads from the necks of birds. On one occasion, he decapitated an ostrich with a specially designed dart, walked to the Senate stands with the animal's bloody head in one hand and his sword in the other, and gestured toward the senators as if to say they would be next. The senators, to keep from laughing and crying, chewed their laurel leaves in silence. It is said he killed 100 lions in a single day, shooting from an elevated platform. That he exterminated 5 hippopotamuses and 2 elephants on 2 consecutive days, that he slaughtered rhinoceroses and giraffes, that he filled the arena with men who had lost their feet to disease, tied fake snakes to their legs, dressed them as giants, and clubbed them to death imitating Hercules' victory. And when the slaughter of animals was not enough, Commodus descended into the arena as a gladiator. He dressed as a secutor. He fought against opponents who knew they had to lose. In public bouts, rivals surrendered immediately. In private sessions, he killed them. The Historia Augusta states he fought 365 times during his father's reign. Commodus himself had inscribed on the Colossus of Nero, "The only left-handed fighter who has conquered 12 times 1,000 men." The Romans watched in horror. For an emperor to descend into the arena was an inconceivable moral degradation, and Commodus charged for it. Each appearance cost Rome 1,000,000 sesterces. In November of the year 192, Commodus celebrated the plebeian games with a ferocity that surpassed everything before. Every morning, he slaughtered hundreds of animals with arrows and javelins. Every afternoon, he fought as a gladiator, winning every confrontation. The crowd, trapped between terror and fascination, screamed his name, or perhaps screamed in fear. And then Commodus announced something that crossed the final line. He declared that on the 1st of January of the year 193, he would inaugurate the new year, not from the imperial palace, dressed in consular purple, as tradition dictated, but from the gladiator's barracks, dressed in armor as just another fighter. The Emperor of Rome would present himself to the world as a gladiator. For 3 people in particular, that announcement was a death sentence. Not for them, but for him. Marcia, Commodus's mistress. Quintus Aemilius Latus, the Praetorian prefect. Eclectus, the imperial chamberlain. All 3 discovered that their names appeared on a list Commodus had prepared. People who would be executed in the new year. The list had been found by Marcia by pure chance. And in that instant, the woman who shared the emperor's bed became the architect of his destruction. The night of the 31st of December of the year 192 was the last night of Commodus's reign, the last night of the Nerva Antonine dynasty, the last night of an era. Marcia prepared poison and mixed it with the beef that Commodus dined on that night. But the emperor, perhaps due to his formidable physical constitution, perhaps because he had drunk too much, vomited the poison before it could take full effect. He complained, murmured suspicions, and staggering made his way to his bath. It was then that the conspirators played their final card. And that card had a name: Narcissus, a fighter, an athlete, Commodus's personal training partner, the man who for years had prepared the emperor for his appearances in the Colosseum, a man whose name evoked, with cruel irony, the youth from Greek mythology who fell in love with his own reflection. Because the real Narcissus did not gaze at himself, he gazed at the beast he had helped create. And that night, he was sent to destroy it. Narcissus entered the imperial baths. He found Commodus weakened by the poison, dazed by alcohol, submerged in hot water. What happened next varies according to the sources. Cassius Dio says he strangled him in the bathtub. Herodian says he suffocated him in his bed. But the result was the same. The fighter's hands closed around the emperor's neck. And Commodus, the man who believed himself Hercules, the man who boasted of having killed 1,000 opponents with his left hand, died like a cornered animal, without an audience, without applause, without the crowd screaming his name. He was 31 years old. He had ruled for 12, and with his last breath, the Nerva Antonine dynasty was extinguished. The line of the 5 good emperors that had guided Rome through nearly a century of prosperity. On the 1st of January of the year 193, the Senate declared Commodus a public enemy, a de facto damnatio memoriae. His statues were torn down. Rome recovered its name. The months were called by their old names again. And the urban prefect, Publius Helvius Pertinax, was proclaimed emperor. But before accepting the throne, Pertinax did something extraordinary. He went to find Pompeianus, the old general who had been retired in the countryside for a decade. He offered him the imperial purple. Once again, Pompeianus said no. He claimed old age. He claimed his sick eyes. And Pertinax was left with the throne nobody wanted. He lasted 87 days. The Praetorians murdered him. What followed was one of the most shameful scenes in Roman history. The Praetorian Guard auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus won by offering 12,000 sesterces to each guard, and in his desperation, Julianus also sought out Pompeianus. He begged him to be his co-emperor, Pompeianus, for the third time, rejected supreme power. Julianus was executed 66 days later by order of Septimius Severus. And Narcissus, the man who had killed the emperor with his own hands, the athlete whose name should have echoed through every street of Rome, was forgotten by history with a speed that seems almost deliberate. Ancient sources mention his act and then fall silent. We don't know what he thought. We don't know what he felt. We don't know if he acted for money, for fear, for conviction, or for personal revenge. What we know is that he was executed during the civil wars that followed Commodus's death, a tool that was discarded after fulfilling its purpose, a gladiator who killed an emperor and whom history decided to treat as a footnote. But in that silence lies a truth more powerful than any cinematic dialogue. Narcissus was what Rome pretended not to see. He was the invisible man, the slave, the athlete, the body trained for the entertainment of others. He was the tool that power used and discarded. And when his hands closed around Commodus's neck, it was not just a murder. It was an act of cosmic symmetry. The gladiator destroying the emperor who played at being a gladiator. And this is where fiction and reality intersect most profoundly, because Ridley Scott's Maximus is not one of these men. He is all of them. He is Macrinas, the provincial general who earned Marcus Aurelius's trust through loyalty and service. He is Pompeianus, the soldier who rejected the throne 3 times because he only wanted to go home. He is Narcissus, the fighter who killed Commodus with his own hands. He is Spartacus, the slave who rebelled against Rome. He is Cincinnatus, the farmer who saved the Republic and then returned to his plough. The original screenplay for the film, written by David Franzoni, centered on Narcissus. But when Ridley Scott joined the project, after seeing the painting Polis Verso by Jean-Léon Gérôme from 1872, the focus changed. John Logan was hired to rewrite the screenplay. It was he who turned Narcissus into a general. It was he who invented the death of Maximus's family. It was he who merged the lives of Macrinus, Pompeianus, Narcissus, and Spartacus into a single character. And in that fusion, something magical happened. The truth became truer than the facts, because none of the real men embodied on their own the complete arc of the story, the glory, the fall, the slavery, the vengeance, the redemption. But together, their lives formed a constellation of experiences that, when condensed into a single character, created something greater than the sum of its parts. Marcus Aurelius was also real, a philosopher-emperor who wrote his meditations in military camps between battles against the Marcomanni. But there is a fundamental invention in the film. There is no evidence that Marcus Aurelius wanted to restore the Roman Republic or that he planned to name a general as his successor. What does exist is that Cassius Dio hints that the emperor was disappointed in his son, but a father's disappointment is not the same as a plan to overthrow a dynasty, and Commodus did not kill his father. That is pure fiction. Marcus Aurelius died of the plague in Vindobona, present-day Vienna, on the 17th of March of the year 180. He died with stoic dignity, surrounded by his officers, in a military camp. But the truth about Commodus is worse than fiction. Joaquin Phoenix created a memorable villain. The real Commodus was all of that and much more. A clinical narcissist, a megalomaniac who renamed civilization in his honor, a man who paraded amputees to beat them to death, an emperor who decapitated ostriches and waved the bloody heads in front of senators. The film gave Commodus a noble death, defeated in singular combat in the arena. The reality was pathetic. Poisoned by his mistress, strangled in his bathtub by his own trainer, without an audience, without honor. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of this story, that reality needs no embellishments to be epic, that the truth, when examined closely, has a richer, more bitter, and more fascinating texture than any Hollywood screenplay. Maximus lived and died with honor, and his tomb waited nearly 2,000 years beneath the mud of the Tiber to be discovered and then buried again for lack of money. Pompeianus rejected supreme power 3 times and was lost in the mist of history, a man who could have changed the course of the world and chose not to. Narcissus killed a tyrant with bare hands and was executed months later, a nameless hero whom history treated as disposable garbage. And Commodus, the monster who believed himself a god, died naked in a bathtub, betrayed by the only 3 beings he had left in the world. There is no golden wheat field. There is no reunion with the dead in the Elysian fields. There is no soft voice whispering, "Rest now," as the camera rises toward the sky. What there is dust, broken marble, inscriptions that erode, and a handful of names that time nearly erased, but that something, some inexplicable force, refused to let fall into oblivion. Because in the year 2000, when Russell Crowe put on the armor of a Roman general who never existed and asked a crowd of extras if they were not entertained, the ghosts of Maximus, Pompeianus, and Narcissus rose from their forgotten tombs, and the world, without knowing it, saw them for the first time. In the year 2008, when archaeologists unearthed the white marble mausoleum on the banks of the Tiber, the newspaper headlines read, "Tomb of the Real Gladiator Discovered." And perhaps on some level that transcends rational understanding, that is exactly what it was. Because stories don't die. They transform, they condense, they are distilled through the centuries until they emerge in forms we barely recognize, but that we feel in our bones as something ancient and true. Maximus Decimus Meridius did not exist, but the men who created him did. And their stories, fragmented, scattered, buried beneath layers of time and oblivion, found their way back to the surface, through a painting from 1872, through a screenwriter searching for a hero, through a director who saw the glory and cruelty of Rome in a single image, and now through these words. Because there are truths that official history prefers to forget. That real heroes don't always die in the arena with a sword in hand. That sometimes they die in the countryside, alone, having rejected a power they knew would destroy them. That sometimes they die executed in an anonymous cell after having changed the course of the world with a single act of violence. That sometimes their tombs are discovered and buried again because no one has the money to care for them, but their echoes persist. In the stones, in the inscriptions, in the weathered marbles, and in the stories we tell about them, even when we don't know we are telling their stories. The echo of the Colosseum never faded, it only changed form, and the men who once walked through its blood-stained sands still walk on, in the darkness of a movie theater, in the glow of a screen. In the voice of a narrator who speaks their names into the night, Maximus, Pompeianus, Narcissus, the real gladiators that Rome doesn't want you to know, but that now, at last, you have come to know.